Hello and welcome to Snooze History. Let me take you back to the summer of 1518, Strasbourg, in the Holy Roman Empire. It's hot, humid and filled with that uniquely European smell of bread, sweat, and light religious guilt. The streets are narrow, cobblestone and beautifully boring. You'd never expect history to remember this place. And yet, it does. Because one morning, Frau Trofea, an ordinary woman with an extraordinary commitment to cardio, walks into the street and starts dancing. No music, no rhythm, just pure, unfiltered, main character energy. At first the neighbours don't think much of it. She's probably humming something in her head, right? Maybe she's just having one of those I will not let the plague ruin my vibe mornings. But after a few minutes, they realise she's not dancing with the music. She's dancing against reality. Hours pass, the sun rises, falls, and rises again, and Frau Trofea keeps moving. Barefoot, exhausted, refusing to stop. By day 2, she's basically inventing the first ever silent disco. People start gathering. Some cheer, some pray. The baker leans out his window like, I've seen people rise early for bread, but this is ridiculous. Kids point. The elderly cross themselves. Even the pigeons look concerned, which is impressive because pigeons aren't known for empathy. And just when everyone thinks this has to end, it spreads. By the end of the week, dozens of people are dancing. Men, women, old, young, all locked in a trance that no one understands. The city square becomes a living, breathing, spinning panic. There's no music, no festival. Just exhaustion and confusion and the sound of sandals slapping stone. If you're imagining a medieval flash mob, you're not far off. Except this one doesn't end with applause. It ends with paramedics. If they'd had TikTok back then, this would have been trending as #medievalgroove gone wrong. Now, the city officials, being the rational geniuses that medieval Europe was famous for, try to explain it. Clearly, they say, this is an excess of hot blood. Because when in doubt, blame the fluids. One physician even suggests that the dancers have been overheated by the stars. Yes, the stars. The 1500s equivalent of saying, Mercury's in retrograde. She's not cursed, she's just vibing. The church, of course, takes it personally. The priests announce that the dancers are possessed, punished for sin. So they do what priests do best. They organise a pilgrimage. The dancers are marched, or rather dragged mid-pirouette, to the shrine of Saint Vitus, the patron saint of dance, epilepsy and ironic plot twists. They sprinkle holy water, light candles and pray, but it doesn't stop. Instead, more people start dancing. Apparently witnessing people dance uncontrollably makes others think, yeah, I could go for a little jig of despair right now. The city begins to spiral. Doctors, priests, even merchants gather in the square, arguing like medieval Reddit threads. Some blame the devil, some blame divine punishment. One guy blames wheat. He's not entirely wrong. We'll get to that later. But the best part, the city council decides to bring in musicians. Because when hundreds of people can't stop dancing, the obvious cure is to add a beat. They hire fiddlers, drummers, and even a small pipe band. And for days, Strasbourg becomes a full-blown music festival. Except everyone's crying, collapsing, and occasionally dying of dehydration. By the second week, the dancing plague consumes the city. People dance in the streets, on bridges, in churchyards. Some die of exhaustion, some of heart attacks, others simply fall still, like candles finally burning out. But the music keeps playing, because the doctors still believe that rhythm will shake out the illness. It's oddly poetic, isn't it? A city trying to cure chaos with more chaos. A world where the cure and the curse dance side by side. And here's the thing. The more you study the dancing plague, the more it feels like a mirror. They lived in a time of famine, disease, anxiety and fear. Every day was survival. and then one woman just snapped. Maybe she wasn't cursed, maybe she was tired, maybe she just couldn't hold it in anymore, and her body decided to do what her heart couldn't move. And as the crowd grew, maybe everyone else saw themselves in her. All their pain, their prayers, their grief, turning into motion. It was terrifying, yes, but also freeing. Maybe for a brief feverish moment, Strasbourg danced away everything it couldn't control. So as we open tonight's story about hysteria, belief, and rhythm in the face of despair, remember this: human beings have always needed a way to let go. Sometimes we pray, sometimes we drink, sometimes we scroll endlessly through Instagram at 2 a.m, and sometimes we dance until the world stops watching. It started with one, but within a week, the streets of Strasbourg were alive with dozens. Mothers, merchants, monks, tailors, all moving, all trembling, all caught in some strange choreography that no one remembered learning. It wasn't graceful, it wasn't joyous. It looked more like pain pretending to be rhythm. Imagine stepping outside for bread and finding your neighbours dancing until their feet bled. That's not a party, that's a collective mental breakdown with better lighting. At first people thought it was harmless. A few women laughing, some clapping, a bit of music, maybe the start of a spontaneous fair. But as the hours dragged on, laughter turned to confusion, then to fear. The crowd swelled. Some dancers smiled like saints, eyes vacant. Others sobbed as they twirled, begging to stop, bodies disobeying their own pleas. The sound wasn't music anymore. It was feet, hundreds of them, slapping stone like a heartbeat that refused to die. And what do humans do when they don't understand something? We gossip. Rumours spread faster than the dancers. Witchcraft. Sin. Poison bread. My neighbour looked at the moon weird. Everyone had a theory, and none of them were helpful, because no one could stop it. By the end of the second week, Strasbourg's marketplace, once filled with voices, spices, and the clatter of trade, became a dance floor of despair. Shopkeepers closed their stalls, musicians watched in horror as the dancers began collapsing, only to rise again and keep moving. Even the pigeons stopped landing. They wanted no part of this. City officials finally realized this wasn't just a passing trend. They held an emergency council. Basically, the 1500s version of a town hall Zoom call, minus the Wi-Fi issues. And as usual, everyone had the wrong solution. The physicians declared, it's a physical illness, an overheating of the blood. The priest said, it's a spiritual curse, God is punishing sin. The merchant said, business is down, can someone fix this before Sunday? And the mayor? He probably just wanted to go home. But no one could go home, because every night the sound of feet echoed through the narrow streets, a steady rhythmic heartbeat of madness. It was hypnotic, beautiful even, like something ancient had awakened beneath the city. The candles in windows flickered with the rhythm. Dogs barked, then went silent. And across the rooftops, the moonlight caught flashes of movement. Bodies turning, twisting, refusing rest. Modern historians have tried to explain it. Some blame ergot, a hallucinogenic mold found in rye, basically medieval LSD. Others think it was mass psychogenic illness, collective stress made visible. Or maybe it was just despair dressed as devotion. After all, 1518 wasn't exactly self-care era. The people were starving, disease was spreading, and the church was taxing everything that moved. Dancing was probably the healthiest thing they'd done all year. But the city didn't see it that way. To them, it looked like divine punishment, a strange contagious theatre of suffering. They called it St. Vitus's dance, named after a saint whose feast day often involved dancing prayers. But this was no prayer. This was panic wrapped in rhythm. Priests arrived with relics, incense and holy water. They stood over exhausted bodies, whispering Latin prayers as if words alone could hold back whatever this was. Monks tied ropes around dancers to keep them from running into walls. Some were carried to chapels, others to the edge of the forest. But still, they danced. No exorcism could reach it. No science could name it. It was a fever made visible. Meanwhile, the physicians were writing notes that sound like the 1500s version of Google searches. How to stop dancing plague. Urgent. Cures for excessive jigging. Why won't Karen stop twirling? One doctor suggested bloodletting. Another recommended a good night's sleep. Neither worked, obviously, because sleep is tricky when your legs think they're auditioning for So You Think You Can Survive 1518. By the third week, the city was split in two. On one side, those who danced, on the other, those who watched. The watchers stopped laughing. They began locking their doors at night. Because if a neighbour started dancing, what if you did too? Mothers whispered to their children, "Don't look at them. Don't listen to the drums," but the sound carried, through windows, through dreams. And sometimes people woke up in the middle of the night, their own feet moving, their hearts racing, as if answering a call from something they couldn't name. The church called it possession. The doctors called it disease. But the dancers themselves, when they could speak, and called it mercy, a kind of release. One woman said, "When I dance, I do not feel hunger. I do not feel fear." And maybe that was the truth of it. In a world of plague and famine, movement was a rebellion, a way to say, "I'm still alive." But every rebellion has its price. Bodies began to collapse one by one. Hearts failed, feet bled. And yet the movement didn't stop. As if the city itself was dancing now, its rhythm carved into the cobblestones. By the time the summer waned, hundreds had joined, and the streets of Strasbourg were forever changed, haunted by a memory that even silence couldn't erase. So next time you find yourself dancing alone in your kitchen at 2 a.m, remember Strasbourg. You're not weird. You're just historically consistent. The city had become a stage, and the dancers, unwilling actors in a play written by exhaustion and hope. No one knew who started the music, and no one knew when it would end. But as long as their feet moved, they believed, maybe, that the world was still listening. And in that rhythm, the people of 1518 became something immortal. They became the city possessed. By the time the bells of Strasbourg's cathedral rang for Sunday Mass, the dancing had already reached the steps of the church. People were collapsing near the doors, panting, trembling, begging for help. And the priest looked down at them and thought, yes, this seems like a problem best solved with incense and Latin. In fairness, it made sense to them. This was 1518. Everything that went wrong was either the devil's fault or your own. You didn't have therapy, you had confession. You didn't have ibuprofen, you had relics. So when faced with hundreds of sweaty, hysterical townsfolk, the church did what it did best. They declared it a matter of the soul. And if the soul was sick, then the cure was prayer, and possibly flagellation, because in the 1500s, everything came back to either sin or hitting yourself with a stick. The priests called for order. They ordered the city council to ban all music, no drums, no fiddles, no dancing in public squares, which was an interesting move, since the dancers clearly weren't waiting for permission in the first place. But the church believed sound was fueling the sickness, that rhythm was how the devil moved. And honestly, they weren't wrong. Some of those beats were probably demonic, so music was outlawed. And anyone caught singing, playing, or even tapping their foot was threatened with excommunication. Imagine being a medieval bard and waking up to that headline. Break-in. Joy officially illegal. Half the city sighed in relief. The other half was like, well, there goes Saturday night. But still, the dancers didn't stop. So the church turned to the sacred. They brought relics, bones of saints, fragments of the true cross, and allegedly the sandal of Saint Vitus himself. They held processions through the streets, chanting psalms as clouds of incense drifted through the air. And for a moment, just a moment, the city fell silent. The dancing slowed. Heads bowed, people wept. But then, a drumbeat began again. Yes. In an attempt to drive out the madness, the priests accidentally encouraged it. They led the dancers to the shrine of Saint Vitus, a pilgrimage site outside the city, believing the saint himself would intervene. So imagine this. Hundreds of twitching, staggering dancers being escorted by solemn monks chanting hymns. The air thick with incense, candles burning low, bells tolling in rhythm to their footsteps. It must have been the most unintentionally metal scene of the 16th century. Saint Vitus, for context, was a Sicilian martyr who, according to legend, could make people dance uncontrollably by his mere presence. So naturally, when people did start dancing uncontrollably, the church said, "Oh good, this is his department." It's like calling the arsonist to help put out the fire. But the people believed. They prayed. They offered candles, coins, and tears. Some tied their shoes to the shrine, symbolic of surrendering their movement to the saint. Others lay on the ground, whispering, "Or take the dance from me." And for some, it worked. Or maybe after 3 weeks of non-stop cardio, their legs just gave out on their own. Meanwhile, the priests recorded everything. Because if there's one thing medieval clergy loved more than divine mysteries, it was taking notes. The journals are filled with lines like, "Many afflicted by the fever of dance. Some confess the devil in their legs. Others ask to keep dancing, for they feel nearer to God." Which is oddly beautiful. That line between devotion and delirium. And that's where the story gets complicated. Because what if this wasn't just madness? What if the people truly believed they were chosen? That their suffering had meaning? In a world where nothing made sense, where disease and hunger came without warning, movement might have felt like a form of control, the only thing left that they could still command, even if it killed them. Imagine the flicker of hundreds of candles against cathedral walls, the smell of smoke, sweat, and sanctity, monks chanting, women trembling, fathers clutching rosaries, whispering names of saints between sobs, and in the middle of it all, a single dancer still moving, eyes wide open, lips murmuring a prayer no one else could hear. But of course, not everyone saw it as holy. One local doctor famously called it a most inconvenient plague of enthusiasm, which sounds like the 16th century version of saying, "She's not cursed, she's just really committed to the bit." Still, the church doubled down. They held week-long vigils, banned alcohol, and declared that even weddings must happen in silence. Because apparently God hated fun that year. It didn't work. Of course it didn't. By the end of the month, the dancing had moved underground, literally. People were found in wine cellars, taverns, and barns, still twitching to the rhythm of something only they could hear. Priests tried to chase them out with relics, but you can't outpray a rave. And so the church reluctantly admitted defeat. The priests returned to their cathedrals. The candles burned low. And Strasbourg fell quiet once again. Not because the dancing stopped, but because the dancers were gone. Some healed, some died, and some simply vanished into the countryside, the names lost to history. The city had thrown everything it had, faith, science, superstition, at a mystery that refused to be solved. And in the end, it wasn't the church that cured the plague. It was time and exhaustion. When the last dancer fell still, no one cheered. They just listened. Because for the first time in weeks, the city was silent. And silence, after so much noise, can sound like salvation. But the church, of course, took credit. They always do. "The prayers worked," they said. "Saint Vitus delivered them." And everyone nodded. Because sometimes you don't argue with the people holding the holy water. In the end, Strasbourg learned something timeless. That faith and fear often dance to the same tune, and that even when the music stops, the echo lingers In the summer of 1518, the church tried to stop the music and found itself dancing too. The church declared victory. The city breathed. And for the first time in months, Strasbourg was quiet. No music, no laughter, no dancing feet. Just the sound of candles burning down and rain whispering through the gutters. The mayor smiled. The priests congratulated themselves. The physicians pretended they'd always known the cure. They had done it. They had silenced the city. But silence is a fragile thing. It can hold peace, or it can hold pressure. And Strasbourg, in its newfound stillness, was holding a lot of pressure. People tried to go back to normal life. The market reopened. The blacksmiths hammered again. Children were told not to talk about the dancing days. But when you tell humans not to talk about something, that's exactly what they talk about. At taverns, whispers spread. My cousin's neighbour's wife said she still hears the music at night. The cobbler's apprentice saw footprints on the church steps, barefoot, fresh. The saint's shrine flickered again. The city was silent, yes, but silence, it turned out, was very loud. In the countryside, strange things began to happen. Farmers claimed their cows wouldn't stop circling the fields. A shepherd swore his sheep moved in time with his heartbeat. And on the river, fishermen said they saw ripples that moved like rhythm. The dancing had stopped. But something underneath had not. The priests called it superstition. The doctors called it imagination. But the people knew what they felt. The air in Strasbourg was heavy, like the city itself was holding its breath. And then one night it began again. A single tambourine, soft, cautious, like someone testing fate. No one knows who played it. Maybe a child, maybe someone who'd forgotten to be afraid. Maybe someone who remembered the freedom. The next night, another sound joined it, a footstep, then two. And by the end of the week, a quiet rhythm pulsed through the back streets. It wasn't madness this time, it was memory. The church, of course, panicked. Nothing terrifies a bishop like unsupervised joy. They sent patrols to confiscate instruments, to search taverns for fiddlers, to silence anyone humming in public. Imagine living in a time when humming was a crime. That's not society, that's the world's most depressing musical. But humans don't unlearn rhythm. We hum when we're sad. We tap when we're nervous. We sway when we're alone. And somewhere between superstition and survival, music crept back into Strasbourg. Quietly, politely, like a ghost returning to a home that never forgave it. The city had built walls around its fear, but rhythm seeps through walls. It began with footsteps, merchants walking in time. Then the bell ringers noticed the echoes carried melody. Even the priests found themselves pausing mid-prayer, as if their own heartbeat had learned to keep count. By the second month, Strasbourg was alive again. Not possessed, not cursed. Just human. And that terrified everyone. The church demanded another fast. Doctors prescribed more bloodletting. One local physician claimed the air itself was dancing, which sounds poetic until you realize he probably meant it literally. They called it a relapse of hysteria, but the townsfolk didn't care anymore. They were tired of being told to stop moving. One diary from 1519, written by a merchant's apprentice, records a tavern scene that perfectly captures the moment. We spoke of the dancers again. The priest said it was sin. The doctor said it was sickness. But the cobbler said, if it's sin, then why did it feel like freedom? And honestly, the cobbler had a point. Because the dancing plague was never really about madness. It was about release. About what happens when people can't speak their fear, so they move instead. When every prayer is unanswered and every authority fails, sometimes the only rebellion left is rhythm. The church's silence had been meant as control. But in that silence, people heard something else. Their own heartbeat. And heartbeat became drumbeat. Drumbeat became movement. Movement became memory. By trying to erase the music, the church had made it immortal. Years passed. The plague never returned with the same fury. But the story lingered, whispered in churches, painted in margins of manuscripts, told by travellers in candlelight, a city that danced itself to death, a faith that mistook rhythm for sin, a silence that couldn't hold. Modern historians still debate it. Was it poisoned bread, collective stress, religious ecstasy? Personally, I think it was humanity, doing what it always does when the world becomes unbearable, finding a way to move anyway. Maybe Frau Trophea, the first dancer, wasn't cursed at all. Maybe she just got tired of standing still. When you think about it, the story of Strasbourg isn't really about disease, it's about endurance, and about the strange, stubborn beauty of people who refuse to stop living. Even when living hurts. The church ended the dance, but they couldn't end the reason for it, because the rhythm, the thing that drives us, moves us, keeps us human, that doesn't die. It hides. It waits. And when the silence gets too heavy, it starts again. History likes to think it's serious, but sometimes it just wants to dance. It's been over 500 years since Strasbourg danced itself into history, and yet even now no one agrees on why it happened. Religion, science, psychology lied. Each has taken a turn at the dance floor, and each has tripped spectacularly. Let's start with the scientists, because of course they always arrived late, centuries later, armed with microscopes and confidence. They looked at the records and said, "Ah yes, clearly this was ergot poisoning." For the uninitiated, ergot is a hallucinogenic fungus that grows on rye, basically medieval LSD. Eat too much of it, and your world starts to sparkle, your fingers twitch, and you might mistake your dinner table for a dance floor. The ergot theory sounds good on paper, until you remember that hundreds of people were affected and somehow managed to coordinate choreography. I've been to weddings where people on actual substances can't even clap on beat, and we're supposed to believe an entire city nailed a medieval flash mob. Unlikely. So others turned to psychology. They called it mass hysteria, or in modern terms, mass psychogenic illness, a sort of emotional contagion. The idea is simple. Humans mirror each other's emotions. Fear spreads, stress multiplies. And in 1518, people were deeply stressed. Famine, plague, taxes, the church breathing down their necks. No TikTok, no therapy, just bread and existential dread. So maybe when one woman began to dance, the rest joined her out of shared anxiety. A physical rebellion against a world that refused to make sense. It's possible. After all, mass hysteria is a strange, real thing. It's happened dozens of times, in schools, in factories, even in convents. In 1962, a group of Tanzanian schoolgirls began laughing uncontrollably, and the laughter spread to nearby towns. In the 15th century, nuns across Europe were seized by fits of meowing. Yes, literal nuns, purring for months. The human mind is a cathedral of chaos. Sometimes it prays, sometimes it dances, sometimes it meows. But even mass hysteria doesn't explain everything. Because the people of Strasbourg didn't just dance for a few hours, they danced for weeks, and many of them claimed they didn't want to. They begged to stop. But something in them wouldn't let go. That's not just hysteria, that's possession, that's devotion, that's something deeper. And that's where modern psychologists bring in their favourite word, trauma. The people of 1518 had lived through starvation, war, disease, and constant divine guilt. They didn't just carry fear, they embodied it. So maybe the dancing plague wasn't madness at all. Maybe it was grief finding the only outlet it could. Because when the world breaks you over and over, eventually your body starts talking for you. And sometimes the body doesn't whisper, it shouts. Imagine centuries of pain compressed into one city, one moment, one rhythm. Every famine, every funeral, every unanswered prayer, all pulsing beneath the cobblestones. And then one day, one woman begins to move. Her feet remember something ancient. Her sorrow finds its sound. And before anyone can stop it, the whole city remembers too. Maybe that's what happened. Not disease, not possession, but memories too heavy to hold still. Of course, scientists hate that answer, because it doesn't fit neatly in a textbook. You can't measure grief with a microscope. You can't weigh despair on a scale. So instead, they keep digging for the fungus, and the priests keep praying for demons. And the rest of us, we just listen for the music. Modern neurologists have even compared the dancers' movements to what happens during seizures, or certain forms of mania. But there's one thing they still can't explain: the synchrony. The way strangers move together, as if some invisible conductor led them. How do you explain that? How do you explain a whole city moving like one body, one heartbeat? Maybe science doesn't have to. Maybe the explanation is less chemical and more human. Every generation likes to believe we've left madness behind, that we're rational now, that we understand ourselves. But look closer. Today, we scroll endlessly. We pace our apartments. We chase dopamine like the dancers chased rhythm. We move without rest, without pause, and call it productivity. The dance never ended. It just changed costumes. In the 1500s, the plague made you dance in the street. In the 2000s, it makes you check your email at 3 a.m. Same energy, different soundtrack. So what was the dancing plague, really? A sickness, a miracle, a rebellion? Maybe all of them. Maybe it was the body's way of reminding the soul that it still existed. When the world becomes unbearable, sometimes the only cure is movement. In the end, every theory falls short, but the dancers remain, their story survives, etched in the margins of history like a rhythm that refuses to fade. No fungus, no saint, no scientist can explain why the people of Strasbourg danced, but they did. And in their movement, their chaos, their surrender, they revealed something eternal. That madness and meaning are not opposites. They are partners. They move together, just like we do. So maybe the real science of madness isn't found in test tubes or scripture. Maybe it's found right here, in that thin line between losing control and finding freedom. Because when you strip away the religion and the medicine and the myth, what you're left with is the oldest truth of all. Humans dance when words fail. 500 years have passed since the streets of Strasbourg fell silent. The cobblestones that once echoed with hundreds of dancing feet now sleep beneath tourists and pigeons. No music, no fever, no frenzy. Just history, filed neatly under weird things that happened in Europe. But if you listen closely, if you walk those same streets at night when the air feels too still, you might swear you hear it, the rhythm. Soft, slow, faint as a heartbeat. Because the truth is, the dance never really ended. Every generation thinks they've left the madness behind, but look around, we're all still dancing, just differently. The people of 1518 danced from exhaustion. We dance from stimulation. They were possessed by faith and fear. We're possessed by Wi-Fi and deadlines. They couldn't stop moving because something in them was breaking. We can't stop moving because something in us might break if we ever stop. We fill our days with scrolling, tapping, swiping, tiny modern waltzes. We call it productivity, but it's the same rhythm of escape. History doesn't repeat itself, it just remixes. Maybe that's what the dancing plague was all along. Not a curse, but a mirror. A reflection of what happens when humanity forgets to rest. When silence feels like punishment. When the body becomes the only instrument left to express what the soul can't say. And if that's true, then the dancers weren't insane, they were honest. Imagine trying to tell a 16th century priest that dancing was your coping mechanism. He'd call The Exorcist. Today, we call it self-care. Time changes everything except us. We're still trying to pray the anxiety away. still prescribing ourselves distractions, still convincing each other that movement equals meaning. But sometimes, meaning hides in stillness, in the pause between steps, in the quiet after the drumbeat. The people of Strasbourg didn't get that chance. They were silenced, not soothed, controlled, not comforted. And maybe that's why the story lingers, because they represent something we still don't understand. How to stop without feeling like we've failed. There's something beautiful about that image, though. A city dancing itself into oblivion because it couldn't bear to stand still and face its pain. It's tragic, it's absurd, it's human. Modern scientists would say they needed therapy. Medieval priests would say they needed exorcism. But maybe what they really needed was a song that ended. Because no one ever talks about that, how much damage an unfinished melody can do. It loops in your head. It gnaws at you. Until one day, you just start moving to it. And maybe that's how history works too. We keep replaying the same songs of war, of faith, of fear. The costumes change, the instruments evolve, but the rhythm stays the same. Somewhere in the universe, the ghosts of Strasbourg are still moving. Their feet don't hurt anymore. The music doesn't punish them. It just carries them, endlessly, weightlessly, through the echo of time. Because maybe heaven, for those who suffered on earth, isn't stillness. It's finally dancing by choice. And hell? Well, that's the part of the story where the Wi-Fi goes out and we're forced to sit quietly with our thoughts. Terrifying. The truth is, we don't know what the dancing plague really was. We never will. It could have been poison. It could have been panic. It could have been grief. But we do know this. It was real. It happened. And it left behind a story so haunting that even half a millennium later, we're still moving to its rhythm. Because that's the thing about history. It doesn't just sit in books, it moves through us. Every laugh, every fear, every sleepless night, every scroll, tap, and breath. We carry it, we perform it, we dance it, whether we know it or not. And maybe that's okay, because movement means life. And sometimes the most human thing we can do is to keep dancing, even when the music makes no sense. And so, the dance of Strasbourg fades into memory, a story of faith, fear, rhythm, and rebellion, where people moved not because they wanted to, but because they had to. And if you think about it, maybe we all still do. We scroll, we run, we overthink, and call it progress. They danced through madness and called it sin. Different century, same exhaustion. History doesn't change, it just updates its playlist. So tonight, wherever you are, if your mind won't quiet down, if your thoughts won't stop spinning, don't worry, you're not losing it. You're just dancing, quietly, like they did. Let the noise fade, let the past rest. And if you hear the faint sound of footsteps in your head, don't be afraid. That's just history keeping you company. Thank you for watching. And remember, the dance never ends. It just gets softer. Good night, traveller. Sleep well, and don't let the monks catch you dancing.